It's not unusual when we run across a serviceman or a retired veteran or a police officer or people that are in the truly service industry. What's our condition response? Thank you for your service. And it's kind of interesting with today's program. We've invited a Navy Marine Corps major as a Navy person. I'm being very respectful of that. Notice I didn't say anything disparaging about my friend. Dr. Marvin Carter is coming to us to speak about a very important, I would say crisis without being too alarmist, but when you hear the stats, you should be alarmed. And it is great delight today that I've invited Dr. Marvin Carter to come and speak to us with his true service dog. And Dr. Carter is indeed exemplifies service above self. What does it mean to sacrifice for our country? And we stand here today because we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone on before us. A little bit about him. He was Marine Corps, from private to major in his career. So not a slacker. Pretty brilliant for a jarhead, for a Marine. And certainly among many other things he has done, he's engaged with the Helping of Brothers and Sisters nonprofit. He is an ex-prisoner of war. He's red, white, and blue dog tags, and you see his service dog keeping him company. Semper, unusual name. I don't know where he got that from. Okay. Southern Nevada Veterans Administration Advocacy Council. He's the so I could go on and on. I don't want to. The program's too important for me to stop up here and babble. So Marvin, come up please and share your story.
I don't have a very loud voice, so if you let me know if you can't hear me back there. Everybody good? I never have. I've always used a microphone, but when we didn't, people just had to be real quiet. So the main thing I wanted to talk about today is veteran suicide. Some other folks have come up and asked me to possibly touch upon a couple other subjects, so I think I'll do that. But first, I have a 2-minute video that I'm going to ask Robert to play that the VA put out that will give you some perspective before I get started.
Suicide among veterans is 22% higher than for people who never served in the military. It's not the obvious reason you'd think. Their rates of suicide are just as high among vets who never deployed to a war or saw combat. But it's a really complex thing to study because suicide remains a pretty rare event, and you can't ever ask someone who has actually taken their own life about the reasons. According to the VA's most recent data, that 22% stat is veterans compared to people who have never served. Breaking that number down into male and female veterans highlights a shocking statistic. Male veterans kill themselves at a rate 19% higher than civilian men. Female veterans die by suicide at a rate 150% higher than civilian women. Pretty clearly, because veteran women are so much more likely to own and know how to handle firearms than civilian women. It's worth highlighting the high suicide rate among male vets is also connected to gun use, since guns are much more often fatal than pills or other methods. But talking about limiting access to guns gets controversial really quick. Some vets have designed their own safeguard, a sort of designated driver for their guns. When they're feeling low, they call a trusted buddy to take their guns out of the house, or give their spouse the key to the gun safe. That prevents a spontaneous, fatal decision in a dark moment. The Department of Veterans Affairs is also taking action. In 2017, they rolled out a futuristic program called ReachVet, which uses predictive analytics to check in on veterans who meet a profile for suicide. The program is making more than 1,000 calls a week. Still, the VA knows that they're not reaching enough veterans. Of the 20 veterans who die by suicide each day, 14 were not getting VA care, which shows that maybe VA care helps, but it needs to be reaching more vets.
And Robert, if you go ahead and do the first part of the thing. I do want to thank you all for letting me come and spend a few minutes with you. And I definitely want to thank the VA of Salisbury for supporting me, because I now live in Las Vegas. So I'm thankful that Pam is here, and the VA there has been very helpful, and I appreciate that very much. How many veterans do we have in the audience? People who have served? many law enforcement people do we have in the audience? Any law enforcement at all?
breakers in here.
Okay. I guess we don't need any people to look after here today. How many lawyers do we have here today?
That would admit it?
Well, the reason I ask is some U.S. states, attempted suicide is still against the law in some states. And North Carolina is where I was born. North Carolina is one of those states where it's still against the law to attempt suicide. And that comes from the old common law that England had where, you know, the king felt it would be disloyal to commit suicide. In fact, back then, they would confiscate, if you ended up succeeding in committing suicide, they'd confiscate all your property as well. So, because you did a disservice to the king. So, or queen, whichever it happened to be. So anyway, but I guess we don't have any of those folks, the lawyers or law enforcement to talk to about that. You'll notice that Robert just handed out a couple of bags, you know, per table there. Like the video points out, if you know a veteran and the veteran is talking to you and you feel he's depressed or anything, get them to the VA. You know, try to get them there. The VA, if you can go there to the emergency room, they will see any veteran on a mental health basis to give them help, no matter what kind of service they had. They'll sort those issues out later. But it does help. They're the only ones that can really address some of the issues that come from, you know, having served the country. And some people wonder why they talk about there and that the statistic for we have veterans committing suicide who never went to combat, who never saw any combat. And they wonder why. Well, why are those? Part of it is because a lot of the training the military does is very realistic. You know, like in the Marine Corps, there's a lot of live firing exercises. You've got to learn to crawl through the mud and things with live rifles, you know, machine gun fire going over you. And that realistic training, which I think is very important, is, you know, shocking to some people, especially that, you know, fairly new to the military. The other thing that, you know, that it doesn't discuss, but why do women commit suicide? But, you know, the VA has only recently started addressing what they call MST, military sexual trauma. You know, it happens to both men and women in the military, but women, a lot of times, as they've tried, as they've integrated into the military, have experienced a lot of that. And the VA has a very strong push going on now with military sexual trauma, and especially women that endure that. But like I said, the number is staggering. It's higher than the civilian work, but, you know, 20 a day, almost 1 per hour is committing suicide somewhere in our country. So. The VA is doing a lot of other programs. Like Robert mentioned, I have a service dog. And now we're pushing that a lot more. We're making sure that the service dogs are very well trained. And I just last year spent some time at VA headquarters as we're rewriting some of the regulations to do that. I'm sure all of you have been on planes and things with dogs, and you're like, how in the world is that a service dog that's running around all over the place or yapping or whatever? But the VA has a very strict requirements to get a service dog. It takes about a year to even get one through the VA. It's very slow, but they have proven to be effective for me. You know, I'd never had a dog. I mean, I grew up on a farm in David County, so we had dogs, but they were all outside, so. But if anybody does want to talk to me more about the service dog program, I'll be around after and I can chat with some of you on that. The other thing I would like to emphasize during my time is try to recognize friends or family members or people you run into that are veterans. You know, we have found a lot of support in Nevada trying to become, I know North Carolina claims to be one of the most veteran-friendly states, and this is where I was born in Winston-Salem. So, but Nevada is also trying to get that, you know, reputation where businesses offer a lot of, you know, offer discounts to veterans. And the big question I get from businesses is, how do we know a person's a veteran? Well, even in North Carolina now, when you go to get your driver's license, you can take your DD-214, which is sort of the birth certificate for veterans, and they'll put that on your driver's license, and it says veteran right on there. and a business wants to know if you're a veteran, you can then say, oh, here it is, right on the driver's license. There are several other ways that you can do it. A lot of veterans now, they go get their care at the VA, get a VA, veterans health card that you can see that they're a veteran. Of course, those who retired, or if you're 100% disabled, you get a military ID, which can also show. But if you're a business person and wanting to know, I found some businesses like to offer the discount because it's good advertising. They put it in their advertising, and then a lot of civilians, patronize the business because they say, oh, well, I'm glad you're very veteran friendly. So there is a way, if you want to know how to do that, I'm happy to talk to you offline about that as well. As I said, I grew up in Davie County, born in Winston-Salem, which of course is Forsyth County, but grew up in Davie County, oldest of 6 children. We were what we called dirt poor back then. My father had a big farm, 100-acre farm, but we didn't have very much money. So, but my mother and father are still living in Davie County. My father just turned 89. My mother, is 80, will be 86 this year, who went back to school after raising 6 kids and became a nurse. And she's now, of course, retired from that. But very determined, and I think that's where I get a lot of that from. My father, a very smart man with a 9th grade education, realized early on and said, Junior, we'll have to get you a college education, son, or you're going to starve to death. But I was not good at farming. He also owned a construction company. I wasn't any good at that. It took me forever to learn how to drive a nail. So, but a very smart man, he said, we'll just have to get you to college, because otherwise you're going to have a tough life. So off I went, and I'm still going to school to this day. So. People ask me if I'm an activist, for veterans' rights, and no, I consider myself an advocate. I advocate for the rights of veterans. I'm nonpartisan. In my opinion, military should be nonpartisan. I think it's a nonpartisan, military or veteran issues are nonpartisan issues. I registered as a nonpartisan when I registered to vote at 18 here in North Carolina, and stayed nonpartisan the rest of my life. So. But I very much advocate, for veterans issues. That's all I talk about when I do meet politicians. If any of your politicians talk to me, all I want to know is what you're doing to help our country, military and our veterans. So, how we're doing on time, because I know we want to leave some room for questions at the end. A little bit, something else about me that I really want to get out into the public and talk about is post-traumatic stress disorder, as they call it. My grandfather, World War I veteran, lived with shell shock, and my grandmother had the bruises to prove it. A very strict and difficult man, but he lived to be 95 and passed away at the VA hospital there in Salisbury, at 95 years old. But we're doing a lot more with that. I like to call it